So good evening. Welcome to this 8th session of Master Shantideva's 6th chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So let me pull up the prayers that we've been doing. Oops, yeah, that worked. Okay, good. Again, we're just going to do the praise, the homage to Shakyamuni Buddha once rather than 3 times, just to save a little bit of time. I think we're doing fine time-wise. I don't think we're going to have a problem finishing the text in tonight and the next session, but let's go ahead and just recite this once, thinking about all the amazing qualities of the Buddha and how each and every one of us has the same potential that the Buddha had and of course has been able to actualize. We too can actualize that state of Buddhahood because we have Buddha nature. And so again, this topic actually may even come up tonight or next week in terms of one of the verses, but let's go ahead and recite this with that understanding. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then we'll do the short mandala offering prayer. Again, visualizing the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful pure land, a Buddha paradise. And we're making this vast pure offering to receive the blessings from the Buddhas, from our gurus, so we can achieve all the realizations of the path, especially the realizations of the perfection of patience that we're studying in this course. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then finally, Refuge and Bodhichitta before the teaching. As usual, we'll do this once in English, twice in the Tibetan, recollecting refuge with the first 2 lines, and then generating Bodhichitta with the last 2 lines. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye du parashog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyen Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation then. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, and then on the basis of a bit calmer mind, we'll set our motivation of bodhicitta. So just do the first few minutes of silent meditation on the breath. If you need a suggestion for how to work with the breath, again, I usually suggest working with the area around the nostrils where you feel the air coming in and out. As you inhale, as you exhale, you just want to stay present with that sensation. Trying not to let the mind wander, but inevitably it will wander and get distracted. And in any of our meditations, we always do have that factor of sort of introspection that checks in to see the quality of our meditation. And if we check in and we see that we've lost the breath, that we're, elsewhere mentally, whatever's going on, then we can acknowledge that. You don't need to have any judgment around it. You simply acknowledge that the mind has wandered, maybe even label what it was that was distracting you, but then return back to the breath. So I will ring the chime in order to begin the meditation period. Again, a few minutes in silence, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So now let's direct our attention to generating motivation of bodhicitta. And to do this tonight, I thought it might be good, since we have been touching on these 8 worldly dharmas in last week's class, talking about the futility of going after praise and gain, reputation. All of these worldly dharmas that we can spend so much time, they can consume our life. Again, it's not to say that there's any problem with having these things in our lives. It's the preoccupation with them, the attachment to gaining them, to having them, and the attachment to not losing them or to experience the opposite. So let's reflect on these very briefly. And as we go through these, just examine in your own life, to what extent have these become, attachments for you. Sometimes I encourage people to think about, whether they're attached to something or not, by how painful it would be to be without that. How much distress would you go through without that? So the very first is this pair of material gain and not experiencing material loss. Become quite attached to having things in our lives. We love to receive gifts, to get things, to sort of fill our life with all sorts of things. And we don't want to lose them. We also have the second pair. This is a predominant one for many of us, being quite attached to having things be comfortable, pleasant, rather than uncomfortable or unpleasant. And look, to what degree do you go out of your way to just achieve comfort and are attached to that, and do everything you can to avoid discomfort. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging how these are problematic for us. It's just to become aware of them so that we don't consume our entire lives going after these, getting involved in these. And then the third pair, wanting, being attached to praise, other people saying good things about us, and then having an aversion to experiencing any criticism. We only want people to say good things about us. Can see to what extent is that something that drives you and you're attached to in this life. And then the last pair that have to do with the bigger picture in terms of how people see us, to have a good reputation and avoid any ill repute. Become quite attached to how we are perceived in general, in our larger group of friends, acquaintances, co-workers, what have you. See to what extent are you attached to having that good reputation and avoiding the opposite. And then recall the one piece of advice that we looked at last time, or I can't remember if it was last time or the time before, from Master Shantideva, where he essentially said, when you get to the end of this life, all of these worldly concerns won't matter. They won't mean anything, because we have to leave everything of this life behind. All the material things we have, all of the comfort and pleasure we've experienced throughout this life, all of the praise we've received, the good reputation we've had. Can't take any of that with us. What will we take with us? The meritorious, the virtuous thoughts that we've had, of course, as well as the non-virtuous. But we want to emphasize here that we have an opportunity in this life to practice great virtue. And if we simply get caught up in those mundane concerns, this makes this life without much meaning. So the most powerful thing that we can do with this life is to generate bodhicitta and to practice the path to enlightenment. So as we turn our attention once more tonight to the teachings that Master Shantideva gives on cultivating one of these 6 perfections, the perfection of patience, the practice of a bodhisattva, infuse your mind with bodhicitta, disregarding any of those worldly concerns and thinking that you're here for this time as well as the rest of this day, this week, this month, this year, this life, with that motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to use this life as meaningfully as possible by working on developing your own qualities, so you then can help all sentient beings to do the same. Okay, let's get back into things. We are again in this section where we've gone through the initial teachings about cultivating patience in terms of the 3 types of patience, as well as other things that might come up that are obstacles for us to encounter. But now we're looking at a whole different collection of things that, as I mentioned last week, it's sort of like people might say, well, won't I be justified in being impatient or getting in the, if there are people getting in the way of various things? And so last week we looked at that whole idea of praise and having a good reputation. And again, on the Bodhisattva path, it is good to have people think well of us. There's nothing wrong with that. But how attached do we get to our reputation and to receiving praise from others? When we hear something that is critical of us, to what extent do we get bent out of shape by that and then really, let that other person have it, So this is the section that we're in. Let me go ahead and pull up the slides so that we can kind of get a grounding in the outlines. So again, we're going to be starting with verse 100 tonight. We're in this section that started with verse 87, and it was essentially called Stopping Anger at Obstructions to One's Wishes. And we looked first at impatience with obstacles to the harm of one's enemies being unsuitable. That was a whole section in and of itself. When we talked about that specific scenario where there are obstacles to your enemies being harmed, and so you get upset at that, angry at that, that was just a short section. We went on then to the fact that it is unsuitable to be impatient with obstacles to one's own benefit and obstacles to the benefit of those belonging to one side. And this is the larger section that we're in now. This started on page 35. That was where that outline was introduced. Then we looked at within this, the anger at obstructions to worldly dharmas is unsuitable. And last week we went into the first of those, that was anger at obstructions to receiving praise and having a good reputation, that's unsuitable. So this is where we were last week. We finished that section, and then we went on to the next section, which actually begins, let's see if I can find the exact page. It's with verse 98. So it begins at the bottom of page 37 of Gyaltsabje's commentary, or towards the bottom, where it says, thinking of it as beneficial. Actually thinking of kind of the fact that we can remove these things and, any of these obstacles, that they're actually good for us, that they do have that side to them. So this is, again, just a couple of verses. We didn't quite finish with this section last week. Thinking of it as beneficial, the first part was anger at obstruction to praise and reputation is unsuitable as it obstructs the lower realms, kind of getting this idea that if we receive all of this praise and good reputation and stuff, it may simply, and if we get angry in the face of that, it may end us causing to, descend to the lower realms and what have you. So if people actually block our praise and good reputation, they're actually helping us, because if we receive all of that and we get deluded by all of that and caught up in all of that, we could actually end up in the lower realms. So this brought us to the top of page 38 in Gyaltsabje's commentary with verse 99. And again, that verse was reiterating that fact that I was just talking to, that we could get caught up in the lower realms if we just continue to follow the worldly dharmas, especially those of praise, reputation, and so on. Now we're in the section that starts on 38 that says anger is unsuitable as one wants to become liberated from cyclic existence. So not only do we want to avoid the lower realms by creating negative karma and getting caught up in the worldly dharmas, we also see these as obstacles to our liberation. And so let's go ahead and look at the that previous slide. The first part of this is anger is unsuitable as obstructions to praise and such liberate from cyclic existence. If we don't receive praise and get caught up in it and have a good reputation and get caught up in it, we actually will have some boon to our attaining liberation. So this is where we're starting tonight, verse 100. It says, I who seek freedom do not need to be bound by material gain and honor. So why should I be angry with those who free me from this bondage? So our anger doesn't make sense if we look at it from the point of view that those who kind of thwart us in gaining those things, having material gain, having praise, having all of the worldly dharmas, they're actually helping us because they're not allowing us to get caught up in worldly dharmas. They're not allowing us to waste this life and be thwarted in achieving liberation. So Gyaltsab on page 38 says, further, since one aspires to liberation from cyclic existence, and since gain and veneration bind one to cyclic existence, one does not need such restraints. We should be delighted that somebody isn't putting those shackles on us by praising us and getting us caught up in the worldly dharmas. How can one be angry at that which liberates one from bondage by obstructing gain and veneration? It would be appropriate to like it. Actually, again, your anger doesn't make sense. And we're seeing once more Master Shantideva is kind of giving us a different logic at looking at things. Normally in worldly terms, we really want to receive all of those accolades and people, commending us and thinking well of us in general and what have you. But in terms of the path to liberation, those are obstacles, those are chains. They bind us to cyclic existence. They don't allow us to be liberated. His Holiness, in his commentary, he says, that we can't lose sight of the ultimate goal. This is really what Master Shantideva is telling us here, is that the ultimate goal is liberation and enlightenment, and anything that gets in the way of that is something that we should be avoiding, and we should be glad when people cause us not to experience those things. The second part of this, still on page 38, is that anger is unsuitable as it cuts the door to suffering. Because this is the other side of it. Of course, if we experience anger, then we're going to actually suffer greatly from this. So why should I be angry at the very doors that do not let me in? They don't allow me to go to that place where I'm going to experience suffering, which are like Buddhas bestowing blessings to those who wish to enter the chamber of suffering. So it's like, again, we can see the people who are thwarting our praise, our gain, all the various worldly dharmas are actually blocking doors, keeping us from going to a place of experiencing more suffering because of our attachment to receiving those, our anger when we don't get those, and so on. So they're actually helping us on the path. Once more, this is an important thing to acknowledge. I did put in a second translation of this verse in particular because I liked the way the Padmakara translation group translated this. They say, they, like Buddha's very blessing, bar my way, determined as I am to plunge myself headlong in sorrow. How can I be angry with them? This is, of course, that idea that, we through the force of our delusion, go towards the causes of suffering. We want to get that praise and we want to be attached to all of that and, have get everything that is an obstacle to that out of the way. And so we readily, easily go into the doorway to suffering. So they're barring our way, even though we might be, through the force of our delusion, wanting to go there because of our attachment to praise and the other worldly concerns. So here Gyaltsab says, I actually inserted deludedly here so that it's just clear. It says, one deludedly wishes to enter the house of suffering. I mean, who wants to suffer? Master Shantideva already said that earlier in the text that, no beings really want to suffer, but nonetheless, they run towards the causes of suffering. It's because of their delusion that this is why we do that, why anybody does that. So one deludedly wishes to enter the house of suffering, but like the blessings of the Buddhas, it becomes the threshold not allowing one to pass into that house. So others blocking our achievement of the worldly concerns block us from going into suffering, experiencing more suffering. Yes, we have to experience the pain of not receiving those things now, not having those things in our life. But if we're really dedicated to the path, at some point it doesn't become painful to not have those at all. Those are just worldly preoccupations. They become more, again, we see them as shackles. We see them as things that bind us and all of that. So then he goes on to say, how can one become angry at that? Since it is a great friend, it is appropriate to like it, to actually be embracing those who become obstacles to our achievement of any of these worldly concerns. So this kind of, points out the way that others can actually be great aids to us on the path by pointing us in the direction of not getting caught up in worldly concerns. And so this is, again, a different perspective. In worldly terms, it doesn't make sense, right? Because you want to get those people out of the way and make sure that you do get all the praise and gain and everything that you feel you deserve. But in Dharma terms, it's just getting caught up in a whole game that is simply mundane. It's not going to lead you anywhere. It's worldly. And as was pointed out earlier, and I mentioned in the motivation tonight, when you get to the end of this life, all that has to be left behind. You aren't able to take any of that with you. Instead, you might end up taking a lot of, non-meritorious, demeritorious actions with you. And all that negative karma will simply cause more suffering. So again, this is why this last final verse was really pointing out how they are blocking the door to that suffering. They're keeping us from going there by not helping us to engage in the worldly dharmas. So how wonderful. So this was this whole section again that had to do with the worldly dharmas. We had seen gain earlier, even in the earlier section. But this is just Master Shantideva once again, not allowing us to have any excuses for why it's okay to be angry. Now we're going to look at a section that's actually about whether you could actually have anger towards somebody who's keeping you from practicing virtue, keeping you from engaging in developing merit. So this one is the second type of anger in this overall outline that's called "It is unsuitable." Where can I find that? Where was that? It is unsuitable to be impatient with obstacles to one's own benefit and obstacles to the benefit of those belonging to one side. So we're looking here now at anger at obstacles to the generation of merit is unsuitable. This is verses 102 all the way through 126. There's kind of a nice long section in here where we do get into kind of how we need to frame sentient beings in a very different light that will become much more meritorious. The anger at the obstacles to generation of merit being unsuitable, this is divided into three parts. The first part is just these two verses, 102 and 103. And the outline here, bottom of page 38, is that it is unsuitable to be angry due to obstructions to merit. It's bit reiterating what we just saw in the other title, but nonetheless, we're going to see more specific examples about that right now. The first of the two outlines within this outline covers verse 102, and it is abide on the supreme austerity. So Master Shantideva says, saying, this hinders my merit, this is the new argument that somebody is putting forward, with him too it is incorrect to be angry. With that person who is an obstacle to your accumulation of merit, it's not appropriate to be angry at them either. If there is no fortitude, similar to patience, should I not abide in that? Isn't that the preferable way to gain merit, by practicing patience? Remember, this harkens back to the second verse that we saw in chapter 6, where we saw Master Shantideva saying, there is no negativity like hatred and no fortitude like patience. Thus, I should cultivate patience persistently through various ways. So that verse again was saying, if there is no fortitude similar to patience, if this is actually a strength and a practice that is incredible in its power, well then isn't that what we should be preferably engaging in, rather than getting angry at somebody who's hindering our merit at some other level? It's just again telling us that we should understand that our own accumulation of merit is going to be greater if we actually practice patience at that time, rather than getting angry at the person who's getting in the way of our practice of accumulating merit or what have you. I think one time when I was teaching on this text or something on patience, I was telling people that it's not a good idea. Of course, this was when people were driving to the center and what have you. Now everyone's at home. But when they were coming to the center, I was saying, yeah, it isn't a good idea to get really angry at all the drivers on the road that are hindering your getting to your class on patience on time. You would be better off to practice patience towards those drivers and not get upset at them that's a better, more meritorious thing than to get angry on your way to a class on patience. Anyway, I thought it was kind of funny, but it definitely points out how what we're talking about here is that if we actually are able to abide in patience, this is the greatest fortitude. This is the greatest strength that we can practice. So it says here at the top of page 39, Gyaltsab Je puts forward the argument that, again, is the new argument for this section about merit. It says, though it is unsuitable to be angry at obstructions to worldly dharmas, enemies obstruct the merits of generosity, morality, and so forth. So when they obstruct my engaging in those other things, isn't it appropriate for me to get angry at them? The answer is, if one does get angry like that, it is unsuitable to be angry at them, because if one aspires towards merit, then wouldn't one abide in patience, since there is no other austerity that equals patience with anger? It is extremely suitable to abide on patience. That, again, this is really our practice right now, and certainly of much greater merit, because as he's going to go on to talk about, we actually end up destroying our merit by getting angry at somebody who's an obstacle to our merit. It's better to practice patience and not, even if we miss an opportunity to practice generosity or some other, something else, that is not as important as our practice of patience, because there's no greater austerity or fortitude than this. So let's move on then to the next verse, which again is still within this section, but the outline heading is obstructing it. In other words, kind of obstructing the person who is going to do all this. I think let me just read the title and then we'll go through the verse and then I'll be clear. Sometimes these outline headings are almost, you have to decipher them as you're going through them. Obstructing it becomes an obstacle to one's merits. So again, if we actually get angry at that time, we're going to lose merit on the basis of that. In verse 103 then, Master Shantideva says, if by my own fault I am not patient with this person obstructing my merit, then it is only I myself hindering involvement in the cause of merit. In other words, I'm creating an obstacle to my generation of merit by not practicing patience. They might be creating an obstacle to my, cultivating whatever merit that I was going to do, practicing generosity or whatever the case might be. But I'm obstructing the greater merit that I could be obtaining by not practicing patience in the face of that person doing what they're doing. So here, again, very short section in Gyaltsab Je. He says, if through one's own fault of being greatly angry, one generates anger to abiding close to the cause of merits of being patient with the enemy, then one obstructs one's merits and not the other person. You are actually the one that's at fault and obstructing merit because you're not able to practice patience at that time. And cultivating patience, recall that I think I did go through this a little bit when we talked and introduced the 6 perfections. The 6 perfections are actually said to be presented in terms of ease and more difficulty. And so at the very beginning, when we practice generosity, it's said to be the easiest to practice of the 6. And of course, some forms of generosity are quite easy to do. Other forms of generosity can be more challenging when you get all the way up to some of these amazing Bodhisattva practices of giving one's own body and so on. But nonetheless, it's said to be the easiest to kind of begin and engage in, and is sort of setting the ground for the other perfections. Then you have the perfection of morality, which is said to be a bit more difficult than generosity. And then you have the practice of patience, which is more difficult than morality. We're going to, of course, in the next course, get into joyous effort, enthusiasm, which is even more difficult, they say, than patience. And we'll get into maybe understanding why that is so as we study that chapter. But patience is a very difficult practice. It is something that actually does entail a very deep sense of understanding all of what Master Shantideva said, being able to apply it, being able to keep one's mind undisturbed and at peace in the face of whatever's going on. And certainly when we look at the times that we live in, where there are so many things that can trigger our anger, that we can get upset about in terms of what's happening politically, what's happening environmentally, what's happening with COVID-19 and all the various things. It's very easy, certainly what's happening socially in terms of social justice around race issues and what have you. It's very easy to get angry at a lot of what's going on. Well, again, if we can funnel that into a more compassionate energy, that's fine. But for us to keep going down the path of anger, this is going to be, problematic. So here, if somebody's getting in the way of us doing something virtuous, even somebody engaging in merit, even the greater practice is to practice patience at that time, not to, get angry at the other person, do something harmful to the other person so that they get out of the way so we can go accumulate merit when we've just done something that's extremely non-meritorious. So we kind of get the logic of it. I don't think I have to, beat it in or anything. But it's important that we recall all these things and all the ways that Master Shantideva encourages us to reframe our situation. The second of the three outlines in this section, that is anger at obstacles. Again, we read that before. Anger is at obstacles. Where was that again? Back here, 102. Always getting these. Anger at obstacles to the generation of merit is unsuitable. That's right. That's the section we're in. Sorry. And then this section is on page 39. It's called "It is not an obstruction to merit." There's a general presentation, and then there's going to be establishing that meaning with an example. So the general presentation is verse 104. If without it something does not occur, and if with it it does come to be, then since this would be the cause of it, how can I call it a hindrance? So this is getting into this whole idea of causality, and the fact that if we're labeling something as a hindrance to our accomplishing merit, but yet if that hindrance is there as a cause to help us to actually accumulate merit, how could we call it a hindrance? So the person who's obstructing our engagement in some other virtue, again, let's use generosity, giving as the example, they are obstructing our engagement in generosity. We see them as a hindrance, but they are actually the cause for us to practice patience, which is the more meritorious action and is incredibly meritorious action. So the point is that we're not labeling that correctly. Just by thinking of them as a hindrance, we're not seeing things correctly. I find this one interesting. It's being inserted here in this particular section around somebody being an obstacle to one's merit. But this is also a good thing to apply at any time. This person is a cause, whoever it is that's annoying you, whether they are saying mean things about you, whether they are, getting in the way of your accomplishing merit, whatever is going on, they are a cause for you to accumulate the merit of practicing patience. So don't think of them as a hindrance. Don't put that negative label on them and try to get rid of them and do whatever you can to put them down or whatever and engage in those actions that are motivated by anger. Your anger is inappropriate. Why? Because they aren't a hindrance at all. They are a cause for you to have virtue in your life, the virtue of practicing patience. We're going to see this in the example that's put forward, and it is something that causes us to then start to reframe those people in a different way. We actually see that they're exactly what we need. Remember how I mentioned earlier that so much of what's in this chapter is mirrored in the Lojong teachings, the mind training teachings, where we work with adversities, problems, difficulties, and we try to see those things not as problems. They are actually exactly what we need to practice a strength of mind, to endure suffering, to develop renunciation, to do all of these things. Here, the context is for us to practice patience. You need difficult people in your life to practice patience. Those people, when they come into your life, you should not be seeing them as a hindrance to whatever, to your attaining gain or praise or having the ability to practice some other meritorious action. They are actually something that can help you to develop the ability to be patient and to be undisturbed in the midst of whatever it is that you encounter. So Gyaltsab here on the middle of page 39, he says, the merit of patience does not arise when there is no harmer. When there is an enemy, then the merit of patience arises, or exists. Let's say the potential for merit to arise exists, because again, it's up to us to practice patience at that time. Just having people that harm you in your life doesn't guarantee you're going to practice patience. You have to, of course, put the effort into it. But to see them as, unnecessary and we want to get rid of them is actually the opposite of how we should see them. They are actually exactly what we need to practice patience. If this very enemy is the definite cause of the merit, then how can it be called an obstruction? How can you call that person a hindrance or an obstruction when they are actually there to help you to practice patience? That which is conducive is not suitable as an obstruction. So, you find a different definition. If you went to the dictionary and looked up hindrance or obstruction, you would see one thing. But if you look at kind of aid or, something that is a necessary component, a cause for our practice, well, that would be very different. It's when we're looking at things the wrong way again. Master Shantideva trying to correct the way we are seeing those people who come into our lives that cause us harm, especially if they're obstructing our merit in this example. But as I said, you can apply this at any time with any harmer coming into your life. You need those people to practice patience. The example that is used in the next verse, let's get that up on the screen here, establishing this with an example, goes back to generosity as well as he uses an example of ordination. He says a beggar, someone who is seeking alms, seeking money, seeking some support from us. A beggar who came at the time was not a hindrance to generosity, right? They are actually, what you need to practice generosity is you need people to give to. When they come into your life and they seek something from you, you should be delighted. And of course, generosity is the first perfection. So by the time you get to patience, the third perfection, you should be delighted whenever you see someone who is seeking something from you. You should be, oh, this is the perfect person for me to practice generosity with, the perfect support. So they're not a hindrance to generosity at that time. And I cannot say that those who give ordination are hindrances to becoming ordained, right? The people who give ordination actually help us to accomplish ordination. If you are, wanting ordination, ordination can also, of course, refer to lay ordination, which is the 5 lay vows. That's considered a form of ordination that you receive. It's not the full ordination or, novice ordination of a monk or a nun. But nonetheless, that is, they're not hindrances to that at all. The people who are there to help us receive ordination, preceptors, what have you, are aiding us in that. They're not hindrances to it. So the merit of patience, he says, does not arise. Oh, I already spread that, I think. And then he says, one more comment on this from Geshe Jampa Gyatso in his commentary. He says, we cannot say that someone who benefits us is a hindrance. This is the gist of this entire argument. If somebody is benefiting you in any way, then they are no longer a hindrance, right? They are no longer somebody who's opposed to us. They are actually an aid for us, somebody who helps us. Okay, so I think I've read all of that. And oh no, I actually didn't do the example. The commentary for the one about establishing with an example here, Gyaltsab Je says, there is no obstruction to generosity due to the begging, he says begging woman, begging person at the time of having and wanting to give away the substance. If you are in a mode where you are ready to practice generosity, you're that good bodhisattva who's, been perfecting their generosity and you're waiting for people to ask for something to be able to give it to them. Well, then when that begging person comes into your life, you're happy, delighted to give them whatever it is that they need. Also, the abbots and preceptors facilitating the going forth, meaning the going into ordination, are unsuitable to be called obstructions to the going forth of those wishing to do so. So if you really want to be ordained, well then the people who can help you to ordain are not obstacles, they benefit you. So again, how could you call someone who benefits you a hindrance? Okay, so then let's go back and getting to the next section, the third, where this is the largest section within this, where we actually have a number of verses and a number of sections within this. Think of it as an object worthy of respect. Think of that person, the hinderer, the harmer, the person who we would normally frame in that way. Actually think of it as somebody worthy of respect. As I mentioned, this is where Shantideva is going to take this, and it's a very powerful way, again, to see the value of these beings in our life. So let's go on then to the 2 outlines within this. The first outline is at the very, very bottom of page 39. One should be respectful since it generates qualities, since this whole interaction with this person is actually helping you to generate qualities. Within this, there are 3 outlines. The first is that there's great benefit to oneself and great benefit of thought, of the thoughts that we cultivate at that time. Then within that, there are three outlines. You see, it's getting quite involved here. The first of the three outlines is the idea that these supreme fields are actually rare. Finding people who will do this for us, who can be a support for our practice of patience, is actually quite difficult. And again, we have maybe people who might object to that and say, actually, I have a lot of difficult people in my life and they're pretty common. But nonetheless, for most of us, they actually are quite rare. And as bodhisattvas develop themselves, they become rarer yet still. So verse 106 in this section about supreme fields are rare, he says, there are indeed beggars in this world, but rare are those who inflict harm. If I have not harmed others, few beings will cause me harm. Of course, this is pointing to the reality that karmically, if you stop harming other beings through your practice of morality, and recall again that morality preceded patience in terms of the perfections, if I'm doing everything I can to stop harming others, well then I'm not creating the karma to be harmed by them. And over time, that does start playing out. Initially, you're not going to necessarily see that. You know, when you first come onto the Buddhist path and you learn all these teachings on karma and you stop killing other beings and stealing from them and all the various things on the 10 non-virtues, you're going to see maybe an effect in your life to some degree in terms of how you feel about things, and maybe some of your interactions with others will be a bit smoother. But initially, you're probably going to still have a lot of people who are coming into your life because of all the past karma that you've created. That past karma that you created manifests in that harmer, and that harmer does something to you. But you know, if also in the moment you don't engage in any sort of interaction with them, then you aren't going to be creating the cause for even any future harm. And if you keep doing that, eventually the harming people will stop coming into your life. You know, every time that we are able to refrain from harming others and not, you know, further this sort of karma, we are going to create more positive effects in our lives. So this is this idea of kind of calling these people rare. As I said, for many of us, we might not find that that's rare. We might actually feel like, thank you, I have plenty of them. Can I loan you a few? You know, would you be happy to take a few difficult people off my hands? If you don't have so many, I'll give you mine. But for, you know, a lot of people, especially after they start practicing the path and become very patient with others, they don't retaliate to others, they don't harm others, well, then you're not creating that type of karma. So Gyaltsab on page 40 says, since the field for patience is rarer than the field for generosity, it is suitable to like one's enemies, because we need those especially. There are a lot of objects for generosity. I mean, look at the world we live in. Certainly there are many people who could use our generosity, who are in difficult shape and who need money, who need support and protection, who need the Dharma and so on, all these types of generosity that we can engage in. But when it comes to those who are in our life that are agitators for us, harmers for us, hindrances for us, in quotes, you know, those are a bit rare, again, for most of us. In the world, the field for generosity is the beggar, and the field for patience is the harmer, that which is harming. And the harmer is rarer than the beggar. And again, generally true. If it is explained why, because if one thus does not harm others, then one will not be harmed in return, right? You know, if we stop creating that karma, then we don't have so many prickly people in our lives. Now keep in mind that even the Buddha himself still had, you know, his cousin Devadatta, who was the prickly person in his life, who couldn't see the Buddha's qualities at all, you know, who kept manifesting in negative ways, trying to kill the Buddha, doing all these things to create a schism in the Sangha, all of this sort of stuff. You know, Devadatta was maybe, I mean, who knows what Devadatta truly was. Maybe he was even a manifestation of the Buddha to show beings that, you know, you still have these kind of people in your life so that people have some fortitude in practicing patience. But, you know, the Buddha didn't have any need for that type of person in his life, because the Buddha had perfected his patience. But we need those people in our lives. Now, those difficult people, as much as they can be challenging to work with, we really do genuinely need them. The next verse is kind of continuing with this idea of these harmers and how we want to be looking at them through the understanding that they are rare and that they are also very precious for us, very, wonderful for us. So this is the idea that it is actually suitable to like them, to feel good about them in your life. Therefore, just like a treasure appearing in my house idly without me accomplishing it, I should be happy at the enemy, for they assist me in my deeds of enlightenment. The enemies are the ones who help you on the path. They are actually a treasure. You know, what's kind of interesting, this verse has rare in the previous verse, 106, and then treasure in this verse. It reminded me of that verse from the 8 verses of Training the Mind, the 4th verse. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by violent negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear, as if I had found a precious treasure. So once more, we see the Lojong being very much mirrored in this. In Shantideva, he's said to be, his text is one of the main sources for a lot of the Tibetan Lojong teachings that were a couple of centuries afterwards when Atisha came to Tibet and began that whole corpus of teachings. But this is the truth about them, is that they're rare to find. You know, they're not as populous as the people who we could be practicing generosity towards or morality towards. But that rareness makes them even more precious in some ways. And the fact that they can act as such a boon to our practice, that we really need them in our lives, make them like a treasure, make them somebody very valuable. It's actually suitable, as this outline said, to like them, to value them, to hold them very dear, because they are exactly what we need, those ill-tempered, negative people. I know hearing this, you kind of go, well, yeah, I get it, but I still don't like having these people in my life. Well, that's kind of the point. You're not liking it is what you have to work with. Kind of have to work with that idea of, I'm going to endure this and be okay with this, forbear through this, because I see that I actually need to develop that skill. That is going to be okay with other people harming us, doing things that harm others, and so on. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't do things to correct the behavior of others in the world who are going astray. This is never to be included in our thinking, that we just kind of think it's okay that they do what they do. We can correct others and help others, but we do it with compassion. We don't do it with anger. Anger is not going to solve the problem, as we've talked about on a number of occasions. It's only going to exacerbate our suffering and the suffering of others. So here, Gyaltsab J in the middle of page 40 says, the fields for patience are rare, therefore one should like, with the thought of wanting to repay their kindness, one's enemies, since they become the condition to meditate on the Bodhisattva action of patience, just like a treasure that one receives effortlessly in one's house. So it's like if this treasure just came into your life without you even needing to look for it or do something to accumulate it. They just had a huge little kind of treasure hunt thing that was going on in the West here. There was some millionaire or billionaire that buried some treasure and put it in some place, and he had a treasure map that with clues or something for where people could find it. And it was finally found. I think it was like in Utah or something like that. But I mean, that's a lot to go through just to obtain whatever treasure it was. I don't even remember what it was, but here it's like the treasure just shows up on your doorstep. You don't have to do anything for it, and it's just there, voila, and you can go, oh good, I get to practice patience. I've got this treasure in my life now. Again, very hard to change our minds to think like this. But that's, again, what the mind training teachings are all about, to reframe things in a much more positive, beneficial way, because we see that, again, reframing them in our worldly way doesn't lead to any benefit. This is what has been pointed out again and again by Shantideva, that we're actually creating the causes for our own suffering. We're going to get in the way of our own liberation, in the way of our enlightenment. We're going to perpetuate all the things that are antithetical to what it is that this whole text is about. This text is about the Bodhisattva's way of life, about achieving enlightenment. And to do that, we have to practice all of these perfections, including the perfection of patience. So we need those people in our lives. We should roll out the red carpet when they come in and go, oh, good, a precious treasure that I can work with. It doesn't mean we create those. I always want to throw that admonishment in there so that people don't think, you start poking the bear, as they say, making somebody into an irritable person so that they then get irritable at you so you can practice patience. That's not a good idea. If you're, don't have those people in your life, it doesn't mean you go seek them out and make them, create them. That's not really a good idea, but when you do have them in your life, be grateful that they're in your life. Think about their kindness because they're helping you to practice patience. So the final outline in this one section here with these verses, verse 108, the outline is, it is appropriate to have the thought of actually benefiting them. Actually, how we generate even greater merit is not just being patient with them, but actually wanting to benefit them. Since it is, I'm sorry, I started reading from here, the verse from Gyaltsab, Venerable Federer's translation. Let's go to the screen where it says, because I am able to practice this, this person, our hindrance at this time, and what we were calling a hindrance, is actually worthy of being the very first to be given the fruit of my patience. For in this way, they are the cause of it. It's kind of like the idea that you would benefit, or I'm sorry, dedicate the merit of your practice of patience for the benefit of the person who helped you to practice it. It's kind of like when people, I never was a musician or anything, but when like people have learned their art from one of their greatest teachers, and they might dedicate their performance and their recording they do or whatever to that person who taught them so much, who gave them so much that allowed them to be the person that they are in their musical skill or whatever other skill, writing skill, dancing skill, whatever the case might be. We have that kind of feeling of indebtedness to the person who helps us in that way. Well, that hinderer is no different. That harmer is coming into your life and is the very support that you need to develop your own qualities, to kind of grow your own beautiful garden. And so in that way, we would want to think of them first, dedicate the positive energy we've created from our practice of patience to the person who most helped us, that greatest hinderer in our lives, the person who we've actually had the hardest time working with. They actually are the greatest support for our patience. So here Gyaltsab says, since it is established through this enemy and myself practicing patience, kind of has to be both parts. We have the enemy and then our own practice of patience in the face of that enemy. We are both the cause for patience. Just like we can say for the musician, having the good teacher is one of the causes, but having the strength and the determination to practice well and to listen to the teacher well and to do what the teacher says and what have you, that's also a cause. So we have kind of two elements in here. It's not just our practice of patience without that person. That person is necessary for our practice of patience. They're one of the two main factors involved. Therefore, it is suitable to dedicate enlightenment, which is the result of patience, first to the harmer. The enemy is a powerful cause for the patience that creates my enlightenment. So again, this is about reframing how we're looking at those people, not just seeing that they are a necessary part of our practice, but actually they are incredibly beneficial for us. It's a real different way to look at people. And again, I won't use any specific names, but we all have those people on the world scene, politically, in our lives, in terms of family, friends, whoever. We have people who challenge us, who push our buttons. We need to stop seeing them in that way as something negative, put that label on them as a harmer, a hinderer, and actually go, wow, this is actually my greatest beneficiary. I'm sorry, benefactor, not beneficiary, benefactor. They are actually the one who's benefiting the most. They are giving me the most, because if I'm able to practice patience in the face of their harm, I'm going to be able to gain enlightenment. So I should be thinking about dedicating it for them first, because they are the one who helped me to do this. Without them, I couldn't do this. So now we get into another little section that is a continuation of this whole idea of kind of the reframing and respecting those beings who are involved in harming us, in quotes, when they actually are benefiting us. This second outline is called Independent from the Benefits of Thought. And again, that's kind of a bit of a puzzle as to making sense of those words. But the next outline within this, because there are three outlines within this, is at the very bottom of page 40. It is incorrect that they are not an object of offering due to not having any intent to benefit. So it's kind of like, we're trying to look at the different thoughts that we need to strengthen in regard to our relationship to them, so that we don't have incorrect thoughts. We actually have the correct thoughts with regard to them. And this will become clearer as we go through these verses. So in verse 109, in this first of these three sections within this, there's an objection raised. This objector says, why should this enemy be venerated, since they have no intention for me to practice patience? It's kind of like, from their side, they didn't say, oh, I'm going to help Don with Don's practice of patience and help him to become a Buddha, so I'm going to annoy him to do this. There was no intention on the part of that person to help me to practice patience. Well, the response is, then why venerate the sacred Dharma that is a fit cause for practice? The sacred Dharma helps us in our practice of various things. But, the Dharma doesn't have an intention to help you, right? Of course, the Buddha who taught the Dharma does, but the Dharma itself, all these texts that we venerate and that we have great regard for, they don't have the intention of helping us to practice patience or anything. They're just texts. They're just, mindless things in that regard. So the argument at the top of page 41 is being set out there. It says, since they do not have the thought to establish patience in my continuum, they are not to be made offerings to. I mean, I shouldn't venerate these people that aren't even intending to help me. This idea of an unintentional benefit is what's being emphasized here. You actually are being benefited, but it's not that they're intending to benefit you. Yeah. The answer that follows, it says, then it follows, one should also not make offerings to the holy Dharma jewel that is suitable as the cause for practice, because it does not have the thought thinking, I shall cause the generation of virtue. So there are a lot of things in our life that benefit us unintentionally. And so you can use different examples. The Dharma is a nice example because the Dharma does benefit us to the greatest degree, right? If you have the Dharma in your life, you read Dharma books, you try to practice and meditate on the Dharma, all of this, it doesn't have any intention to help you. But nonetheless, you can benefit greatly from it. But we do even have other things in our life that are benefiting us that are unintentional. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in a little book that's called How to Expand Love, where he's talking about this whole thing of unintended kindness, unintentional benefit. In this first part, I'm going to share a little bit more after the next verse, but he says, when we want rain and it rains, we are grateful, even though there is no motivation on the part of the shower to help us. Also, if we want a grove of trees to roam in, we are happy to have that grove and value it, even though the stand of trees itself has no motivation to help. I think that should be no motivation, not motivation. Doesn't sound quite right. So this is, again, just other examples, but the Dharma is a really good example because, once more, a grove of trees or the rain help us temporally, but the Dharma helps us to the greatest degree, ultimately. So that was the first argument that was being put forward, was like, this person doesn't intend to benefit you, to help you to practice, patience. So why should you venerate them? This is the second verse, has to do with the fact that it is incorrect that they are not an object of offering as they have the intent to harm. So someone's going to put an additional argument. This objector is going to say, since that person actually intends to cause you harm, they are not to be venerated. Well, the response that's given here now by Shantideva is saying, if, like a doctor, someone strives to benefit me, then how can I practice patience? This is the idea that if everyone in our world was like a doctor that wanted to help us, and here we're talking about kind of a good doctor, somebody who is really compassionate and caring and concerned and really wants to be attentive to our welfare, if everyone you met was like a doctor or a good friend, then you could never practice patience. It's impossible to practice patience without the harmers. So even if they intend to harm, that's a necessary component for them to be a support for our patience, is because we need to be on the receiving end of that harm in order to practice this. So these two things are being put forward. The fact that even though they don't intend to benefit, they still are worthy of veneration. And even though they intend to harm, they are worthy of veneration. In fact, this is even more important because we need those people in our lives that want to harm us, that want to upset us, that get angry at us in the grocery store, or whatever the case might be. We need that sort of karma to ripen into that, and for us to use it as an experience to be able to practice patience in the midst of that. And of course, our practice of patience will help us to karmically sort of disconnect from that person. We won't be creating that type of karma where we have to keep experiencing that again and again with them, where we become the perpetrator the next time and they become the one yelled at, or, causing things to happen to them, and then they do the same thing to us because we just keep holding on to it and recreating that pattern. They come into our life not intending to benefit, but actually intending to harm, and we can learn from that and sort of disconnect from that whole thing and actually change our karma and become enlightened on the basis of that. So those were the first two sections of this. Did I read that? No, I didn't read that. Okay, let me read that. Sorry, I didn't. Before I read what's on the screen, that's the argument is put forward, and it says, no, it's not the same as what you just said. Here, the enemy is not an object of offering because they actually have the intent to harm me. So it wasn't just that they don't want to benefit; it's that they actually do want to harm. There are a lot of people that don't want to benefit us in the world. They're just kind of wandering around, not even paying attention to us. But this is actually somebody who not only doesn't want to benefit, they want us to experience some suffering, some pain. The answer is, if they strove to accomplish benefit and happiness like a doctor, then they would not be the object of patience. How would one then practice the patience that does not think of anything of suffering? How would you develop that tolerance in the face of suffering and harm if you didn't have those people in your life? It is suitable to like the harmer. It is suitable to be grateful to the harmer. And this is where I'm going to go back to the screen then and share two more little slides with something more from His Holiness in his book, How to Expand Love. He says, the worst consequence of not being mindful of the unintended kindness of others comes into view when we consider our enemies. Without enemies, you could not fully engage in the practice of patience, tolerance, and forbearance. We need enemies, and we should be grateful to them. From the viewpoint of training in altruism, an enemy is really your guru, your teacher. Only an enemy can teach you tolerance. An enemy is the greatest teacher of altruism, and for that reason, instead of hating, we must respect them. This is the importance of these teachers in our lives, these gurus, these precious treasures. Then the final outline here is that they are a suitable object for offerings since they act as an object for patience. Shantideva says, thus, since patience is produced in dependence upon a very hateful mind, they are a cause of patience, whereby they are worthy of veneration, just like the sacred Dharma. So again, because we will generate good qualities on the basis of that, they are something we should be grateful for and venerate and be happy about in our lives. So here, last bit on page 41. Since patience is not completed in dependence on a mind intending to benefit, it is generated in dependence on the harm inflicted due to strong hatred. We need those people who are, funneling their hatred at us in order to practice patience. We don't develop it on a mind intending to benefit us. You can't be patient with the person who's throwing flowers at you and delighted that you're here and, showering you with gifts, all those kinds of things. Hence, only the harmer is the cause of patience and is suitable to be made offerings to, just like the holy Dharma, despite not having the intent to benefit. Okay, so then we get into this next little section, which sort of is a takeoff on all of this to the extreme degree of actually seeing these beings who are, quote, harmers as like the Buddha, viewing them like the Buddha. This is verses 112 through 118, a really nice section that is so important in our practice to learn to see others on the same level as the Buddhas. In Buddhist practice, we get very attached to Buddhas and holy beings and holy objects and think that they're the most important thing to kind of be surrounded with and have in our lives. Well, sentient beings are also equally important in regard to them being a support for our practice of the Bodhisattva path and developing patience and so on. So we're going to get an extensive explanation. That's the major part of this. And then we're going to have a summary verse. In the extensive explanation, the very first outline on page 43 says, it is stated in the scriptures that sentient beings and Buddhas are equal in being a field for merit, a field of merit, where we can develop merit. Therefore, the Muni taught the field of sentient beings and the so-called field of victors, or the field of excellence, the field of these great qualities. So we did run into this idea of fields before, but anyway, it's a slightly different presentation kind of talking about these two fields. The fields of sentient beings, which are those who are the support for so much of our practice of the path, and then the field of excellence, which are there to accumulate a different type of merit through our faith and our devotion, dedication to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and what have you. So here, in terms of the commentary of Gyaltsab, he says, since it is necessary to treat sentient beings with respect, it is stated in the sutra perfectly containing Dharma, the field of sentient beings is the field of the Buddhas. From the field of the Buddhas, the Buddha Dharma is obtained. It would be unsuitable to mistreat them. In other words, because Buddhas are developed from sentient beings, using them as the support for their bodhicitta, for their practices, morality, and so on, they are the field of Buddhas in a sense. We need equally both beings in our lives, sentient beings and holy beings. The holy beings are there for veneration, offering support, in a different way. One teacher actually even alluded to, this was from Kunzang Peldon's commentary, he says that they are the support for the practice of wisdom. Remember how we kind of talk about the two wings of a bird. The wing of wisdom is supported through the holy beings. They are who give us that wisdom, who help us to know the Dharma, who help us to understand it. But then how we generate the wing of compassion and method is through engaging in those activities with relation to sentient beings. Not to say that, again, we can't do activities towards the three jewels. We can make our water bowl offerings and so on. But most of what we do in terms of accumulating merit and developing compassionate motivation is all of our actions in relation to sentient beings. That's why Rinpoche, frequently when he teaches, he will talk about, Lama Zopa mentions how every sentient being you meet is the cause of your past, present, and future happiness, all the way up to enlightenment, because they are a support for so much of our practice of good karma, our development of good qualities, our development of bodhicitta, our practice of the six perfections, and so on. Without those sentient beings, you can't become enlightened. He said that, and Rinpoche says that frequently as well. You need every single sentient being. They are support for your enlightenment. That being is the source of your enlightenment. If we look at every being in this way, then we come to recognize that we need every one of them. They are a support for all of us. So in that way, they are equal to the Buddhas. Not equal in regard to their qualities, we're going to see this coming up, but equal in regard to them being a support for the result. So Gyaltsab concludes this little commentary on this verse saying, or these two lines saying, in this and other quotes, the able one, the Buddha, stated that the field of sentient beings, where one can plant the extensive seeds for merits, is as much a field to accumulate merits as the field of the Buddhas. You accumulate merits in both fields, so don't neglect one for the sake of the others, or don't think you can push away beings in that one field and not respect them and hold them in that light. You need all those beings. Every one of those beings you need to achieve enlightenment mind and to achieve complete enlightenment. So let's go on then to the next outline. This is establishing this with reasoning. And so we're going to have a few outlines within this. The first one is by having faith in the Buddhas and sentient beings, one will attain the ultimate aim. It's the final two lines of verse 112. Many who have pleased them have thereby reached perfection. If you actually hold those beings as very dear and attend to them and benefit them and take care of them and don't get angry at them, you actually can attain great results from that. Gyaltsab says, it is suitable to respect all sentient beings because by having faith in the Buddhas and sentient beings, both together, and by making them happy, the sentient beings, many have gone to the perfection beyond that has completed the two purposes, the purpose of oneself through attaining the enlightenment state, which is the culmination of your own welfare, and the purpose of others. Because when you are a Buddha, you then can manifest in the forms that sentient beings need to be benefited, to be taught the Dharma and led on the path. The next outline has a long title to it at the bottom of page 43. To discriminate between them, accepting one and rejecting the other, is unsuitable, since they are the same, and that one will attain enlightenment by having faith in them. So this is this reality that we absolutely need both fields. A Buddha's qualities are accomplished from sentient beings and the victors alike. So what kind of system is it that I do not respect sentient beings in the same way I respect the victors? The victors, of course, are the Buddhas, and as I was saying, we can't have that idea that we need to put all of our attention on, attending to and making offerings to the Buddhas and neglect sentient beings. We're going to get even more arguments for this as this goes along, because Buddhas are dedicated to sentient beings. That's who we should be ideally helping. Buddhas don't need our help in the ways that sentient beings do. Buddhas are enlightened beings. They've developed their minds fully. They're on, the 5 paths that are set out for the practice of the Bodhisattva path. The 5th one is called the path of no more learning. That's Buddhahood. There's no more learning for them. They don't have to be taught the Dharma. They know the Dharma inside and out. Their minds are complete. They have omniscient mind. who really needs our help are sentient beings. And again, we need both as a support. That's what's being pointed out in this verse. You can't get to enlightenment without both of them. Let's go forward just a little bit more, since it's getting close to 1:45. I want to try to get through this section if possible. At the top of page 44, we're going to get some objections, and we're going to refute those. First is refuting that it is unsuitable to meditate equally on patience because of not having equal qualities. In other words, that sentient beings are, maybe it isn't as important because they don't possess the qualities of Buddhas. So here, verse 114, Shantideva says, they are not similar in the excellent qualities of their intentions, but in the results. Sentient beings also have excellent qualities, and they are therefore equal. I mean, we can find some among sentient beings who do have good qualities, who we can look to and be enamored of their qualities. They are evidence that sentient beings can develop their minds all the way to Buddhahood, but they don't have the full qualities, the excellent qualities of the Buddhas. That would be a mistake to see them in that light, to see them as already enlightened, because they aren't enlightened. We don't know for sure. Of course, this is the big mystery we always deal with, is who is a Buddha and who isn't a Buddha, who's a Bodhisattva and who isn't a Bodhisattva. We don't necessarily know that. But in this presentation, we're looking at sentient beings from the point of them being under the control of their karma and their delusions, in the same state that we find ourselves in. And from that vantage point, they don't possess the qualities of the Buddhas. So the argument is put forward here, even though they are a field of merit, since they do not have equal qualities, it's unsuitable to make offerings to them as to the Buddhas. You should pay more attention to the Buddhas because they got all these amazing qualities. Again, we saw that referred to earlier. I don't remember the exact verse where we called them a field of excellence, because they have all those excellent qualities. They are really an important support for us. And making offerings to them and so on is important. But we're not talking about the sentient beings possessing the same qualities. They aren't a field of excellence. But nonetheless, they are a field equally for us to generate merit due to the answer that's given. Gyaltsep Je says, they are not made equal through the qualities of thought, but because they are the same in being the cause for enlightenment. In the result of enlightenment, the result depends upon both. You can't get enlightened without both fields. You need the Buddhas in your life and you need sentient beings in your life. If there aren't those sentient beings, you cannot accumulate the merit and develop your mind compassionately and practice patience and all the other things we're talking about and get to enlightenment. And of course, you need the Buddhas as a support, the 3 jewels and so on, for your practice of the Dharma. If one is also respectful to sentient beings, then one will also have the qualities of enlightenment, and therefore they are equal fields. So this is, again, just some refutations or objections that are being put forward here. Let me pull up the screen for the outline and go on to the next one. It is suitable to equally meditate on faith because the greatness of having faith in both sentient beings and the Buddhas is equally the cause for enlightenment. So here in this verse and a half, verse 115, whatever veneration of one with a loving mind is the greatness of sentient beings. Whatever merit of faith in the Buddhas is the greatness of Buddhas. And then in 116, the first 2 lines, therefore, they are asserted to be equal in the share they have in establishing a Buddha's qualities. In other words, because sentient beings, if you have one person who is developing a loving mind towards all sentient beings, that's what makes venerating that person great, is because they have a mind that has love for all beings, because that love has been generated to that degree. And if one has faith in the Buddhas, that's due to the object of faith that that person has, the Buddhas who are excellent in their qualities. So there is merit with regard to both, having sentient beings as the basis and having Buddhas as the basis. Therefore, they are asserted to be equal, because they both have a share in developing the qualities. So here I'm going to use Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary on this. Again, I found it a little bit clearer perhaps. Whatever veneration of one with a loving mind towards all sentient beings, which is explained to be of infinite merit. This is actually a mind that is unbelievable. If you could have the mind of immeasurable love towards all beings, that's the greatness of sentient beings, them acting as a support for one to develop that depth of love. The objects of love, those beings. Whatever merit of faith in the Buddhas is the greatness of Buddhas, which are the objects of faith. One has faith in the Buddhas, and because they have excellent qualities, that points to the greatness of Buddhas, because that faith in Buddhas is very powerful and to be applauded, just like the loving mind towards all sentient beings is great and worthy of veneration. Therefore, he says, the faiths in both are equal in the share of causes they have in establishing a Buddha's qualities, whereby they are asserted to be equal in being objects towards which faith is suitable, or confidence, or kind of having some conviction that we need both sentient beings and Buddhas, because they can both act as the basis for unbelievable qualities and merit. So then the final outline in these three, before we get to the summary, is it is suitable to have faith because the merits of making offerings to sentient beings who possess parts of the qualities of a Buddha is infinite. Even if Buddhas have, or if sentient beings have a part of the qualities of the Buddhas, there's already infinite merit in doing that, making homage to them and what have you. So this starts off with the rest of 116, which says, they are not equal with the Buddhas who are boundless oceans of excellence. Even if the three realms were offered for the sake of venerating some person in whom a mere share of the good qualities of the unique assembly of supreme excellent qualities appears, though, it would be little. It would be insufficient, because anyone having even a semblance of the qualities of the Buddhas is a worthy object of veneration. Of course, sentient beings all have some qualities to some degree. One teacher pointed out that sort of even the quality of being a field of accumulation of merit is sort of a sufficient quality. I mean, that's kind of strange to say, oh, this being, the only quality they have is that they're just appropriate as a field of merit for me to practice virtue towards. But nonetheless, they are a suffering being. In that way, they are that for me, and they can become a part of my attainment of Buddhahood, anyone's attainment of Buddhahood. So here the argument is set forth at the top of page 45, saying, from the side of the qualities of thought, they are not equal, because they are not at all of equal qualities with the Buddhas that possess an infinite ocean of extensive and difficult to fathom qualities. We can't even imagine all the qualities of a Buddha. They do set them out in the traditional texts in terms of the 18 unshared qualities. That includes the 10 powers and all these various things. But that's just kind of putting a label on that. We can't even fathom in our minds the amazing qualities of the Buddhas. Well, sentient beings are not the same as that, but they do have some qualities. The answer is given, though they do not have equal qualities, there are some that have parts of the qualities of the Buddhas, who are an unequaled accumulation of supreme and great qualities. We see this in our world, right? I mean, we can find good qualities in almost anybody, even somebody who comes off as being really despicable. I always use Venerable Rabina's example of Adolf Hitler. And she says Adolf Hitler was, sure, a horrible person in terms of all of the suffering that he caused, horrible actions that were engaged in through his presence in this world and his thoughts and intentions that played out in Nazi Germany and so on. But she says even Adolf Hitler loved his little doggy woggy. He had some good qualities of caring for his German shepherds or whatever dogs he had, and for caring for his family and the people that were dear to him. He had some good qualities in there. All beings have some measure of good qualities. But nonetheless, we can see some who have some qualities that sort of are reflections of the Buddhas. Mother Teresa is a good example frequently, right? I know there are a lot of things that after the fact, after she was gone, picking apart her life and what have you, but she was very kind-hearted and very selfless in the acts that she did in Calcutta and so on. And then there was, there are great people in our time, John Lewis, who just died, who showed amazing qualities of care and concern for social justice and the welfare for all, and never engaged in any violence on the face of that, always practiced nonviolence. I mean, amazing beings in terms of their practice of the path in its own way. They're on their own path. I don't know, maybe John Lewis was a Buddha too. We have no idea. But nonetheless, we can see that in the world. So we can see that somebody even just possessing a part of the qualities of the Buddha would certainly be worthy as an object of veneration. So it says here, to give all objects of the three times for the purpose of making offerings to them would still be insufficient, would still be too little. What need is there to mention others? They're worthy of so much more. So again, we're just pointing out that sentient beings do have some qualities. We can see that to some degree. let's finish off this section. We've got some time, and then we'll see if we can answer a question or two. Verse 118, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, this is just summary. That's right, that's the outline. Here it says, thus, since sentient beings have a share in giving rise to the supreme qualities of the Buddhas, it is correct to venerate sentient beings, due to similarity through just these. Because they're similar in that way as being a support for our development of enlightenment, and they have some qualities within them, and they give rise to the qualities that we can develop in terms of Buddhahood, we need to venerate them equally. So here, the commentary that's on page 45 in the middle of Gyaltsabje's text, he says, though they do not have qualities equal to the Buddhas, since a part of the cause that generates these supreme qualities exists in sentient beings, they become equal merely through this. Hence, it is suitable to respect sentient beings and make offerings to them as to the Buddhas. So here, actually, in some commentaries, they point out Buddha nature. You know, Buddha nature wasn't mentioned by Gyaltsabje in our commentary. But all beings possess Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the fundamental purity of the mind. The mind is currently obscured by all of these delusions, adventitious stains that are in the mind. But every being possesses a fundamentally clear, pure mind that is clouded for the moment, but only temporarily. Once everything is created to remove all of that, all the causes and conditions, they can be in that state of absolute purity. And so in that way, they have all the raw stuff from which all the qualities of Buddhahood are developed. Buddha nature refers at the deeper level to the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. But at the more conventional level, it refers to the developmental qualities of the mind, that the mind can go through that process of sangye. Sangye refers to Buddhahood. Sang means to completely purify, remove everything that obscures the mind. Gye means to completely develop all the positive qualities. Well, this is completely possible within the sphere of Buddha nature. Because the mind is empty, doesn't have any inherent existence, every being can develop their mind in that direction. So every being has that sort of raw material that is their future Buddhahood, you know, that is there within them. In that way, we can point to all beings as having that fundamental quality of having Buddha nature, sort of that inner goodness within them. I think this is actually even what Chogyam Trungpa called it, according to what Pema Chodron says. I think it was inner goodness. He sometimes even uses this term, the soft spot, to refer to the kind of the place that, from which a lot of those qualities develop, when we are able to get in touch with our deeper sense of who we are and why we're here and what have you. So this is just pointing to the fact that all beings can be a support for this. All beings help us to have these qualities. All beings have some qualities within themselves. Therefore, they are equal as objects of faith, of veneration, of offering to the Buddhas. You know, they're not equal in their qualities at all. We're not saying that. We're saying that they're equal as fields of merit for us to be able to develop ourselves. So let me check the chat box. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was all the Gyaltsabje. Yeah, that's the text that I'm referring to whenever I say Gyaltsabje. Gyaltsabje was actually one of Lama Tsongkhapa's heart disciples. Kedrupje and Gyaltsabje. Kedrupje is the kind of stern, mean-looking one, a bit wrathful, and Gyaltsabje is the kind of soft, loving face one, you know, in the little picture of Lama Tsongkhapa and his two spiritual sons. Any questions or comments on what we've talked about tonight? I'm happy to try to address any comments or questions. Anyone? So good to see all of your faces here tonight. So, yes, Fernando.
So it's in relation to the comment that Andrea made last week in relation to ego, which is something that we want to eradicate. Nonetheless, I was receiving a teaching a weekend before that class, which we were learning about Lojong, about that a bodhisattva has a strong sense of ego, because he even compromised to save or to take out of samsara to every single sentient being, although he's not egocentric. Is that like a valid?
Yeah, I think that can be said, Fernando, without any problem. I mean, again, when we use the word ego, ego, of course, isn't a Buddhist word. This is a Greek word that was, used now in Western psychology to refer to things. Nonetheless, when we say, ego-centered or egocentric, we're getting at kind of the same idea, that we're sort of elevating ourselves to a greater status and grasping at, when we use the term ego grasping at a sense of self or ego that is fabricated. And again, when we're practicing Lojong, we're actually trying to get at both of those. But what we're not trying to destroy, and actually what we need, as you're pointing out, is a strong sense of self-confidence, a strong sense of being able to accomplish what we are setting out to do, and to practice fortitude and, strength in the face of all the things that we're experiencing. So it's interesting, even I think it was a book by Rob Priest, who is a student of Lama Yeshe's. I've never met him, but he wrote a book called The Psychology of Buddhist Tantra. And he has a whole chapter in there where he talks about how having a healthy sense of self is really important for the tantric path as well, because there we even get into the whole concept of divine pride and of kind of this feeling of being a Buddha right now. And of course, Tantra is very much about manifesting a bit of a big I or self, if you will, but not all the ego trappings that go with it, obviously. So yes, there's a need to delineate these two, and to say that we need a strong sense of self-confidence, of a determination that we are going to do what it takes, and we have the ability to do that, sort of infuse ourself with those sorts of qualities, but not inflate ourselves with all of the mistaken ideas about I, which is what we refer to when we say egocentric or ego grasping or what have you. Does that make some sense then, Fernando, or you have more questions?
Yes, no, it's perfect.
Okay. Yeah, yes, Andrea.
So on that note, thanks for bringing it back, because I wrote a question. I think when you mentioned, my comment was about the self-confidence in the sense of more of serenity and understanding of self. Self-confidence comes with a little bit of a heavy, right? But the idea is that, for example, let's say if somebody is in a relationship, right? Somebody that they can't avoid, they live with, and that person is constantly putting say the husband's putting the wife down constantly. You can't do anything right. You're stupid. You're this. Like, how do, that person can say, okay, he's my teacher, but then there's that element of, at what point you trust that it's okay for that, and then you get into the carpet situation. But it's like, I think for the day-to-day life, it's hard for somebody to endure the patience. And what's the antidote, right?
Yeah, that gets to be a very tough one to work with, because again, for many people, based on where they're at in their practice, it might be good for them to be with somebody like that. I mean, even Lama Atisha had said when he went to Tibet, he wasn't sure what the Tibetan people were going to be like. He thought they'd be very, smooth-natured, and so he brought along his Bengali tea boy that pushed his buttons. So he actually brought somebody along that he knew would be annoying him because he wanted to be able to practice patience, and he was afraid that the Tibetans wouldn't be able to help him. And of course, the story goes that he got to Tibet, and they were actually really helpful. They also pushed his buttons, so he didn't need to bring his Bengali tea boy. But that was a special level of practice, right? That's somebody who can actually say, I want to be around this because I see it's a really rich field for me to practice patience. But you can have some people who, again, maybe this becomes a huge obstacle for them. Maybe they become suicidal. They become depressed.
Right.
They don't have the ability to work with their minds to embrace this as something that will help their qualities. They see it as actually an obstacle to their mental well-being. Well, then you would never say to somebody like that, well, you need to stay with this person and just keep practicing patience. Because the other side of it too is that to keep the other person engaged in that negative behavior towards the victim, in this case, we'll put that label on that person, but that is also not good, because that perpetuates their engagement in non-virtue. So we have to be really tricky with this whole thing, and not, and certainly if you're in any type of situation, I always emphasize this because I never know in people's individual situation. I'm not saying this to you specifically, Andrea, but anybody who's hearing this, if you're in a situation where the person is engaging in a lot of negative behavior, becoming not just verbally abusive, but physically abusive or sexually abusive, you really have to take these teachings with a grain of salt and recognize that
Right.
maybe that isn't the right time to practice those, that to exit from that situation and to not allow that person to continue to perpetuate those patterns might be the most compassionate thing you can do for them and for you. So
Interesting.
we all have to practice where we are. So we can, some of us, invite those Bengali tea boys into our lives and feel really
Right.
good about having somebody who pushes our buttons. Not that, again, we're poking the bear and encouraging them to do things to harm us, but we can be okay with having that bit of friction because we see it's a great boon to our practice. But there are other situations where we really have to take a different look at it because it's really
Right.
not so beneficial for ourselves because we don't have the capacity, and it's not beneficial for the other because they just keep creating more negative karma in their lives.
How
So
interesting. Yeah, so there is a point where you have to recognize that you are ready for that practice too. That's what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, and that's where I like the title of Pema Chodron's book on Lojong. She called it "Start Where You Are," which is like so important to keep remembering that we can't start where we aren't, in terms of, and that's what's always interesting. Sometimes I'm called upon, like this week, I did a little evening on learning to like problems, or last week in Denver, to the group there, and people can come into those teachings and they're like blown away by the concept of working with their problems in that way. Rinpoche,
Right.
he always says we want to learn to like our problems like we like ice cream or music. Well, most people hear that on the street and they're like going, "You're crazy." They aren't ready to practice that way. So we always have to practice where we are. And the initial teachings might be, and I always encourage people to have this as your first line of defense, to get away from those things that trigger you. Not be, and I think we've even talked about this, has come up before in your questions, Andrea, or someone else, that the first line of defense is to say, I need to be removed from that situation because I don't have the strength of mind to practice with it. Then we keep working on our mind while we are away from it or while we have some distance from it, and we test the waters occasionally. We get back in presence of that and see how we do at maintaining our patience. And then if we do a little bit better, well, then we congratulate ourselves. We keep doing the work until we can be with that person and not be triggered. But initially, we need some space. I don't see how anybody could practice these amazing practices of the Bodhisattva right from the get-go, because you need to have some strength of mind from your own working with these ideas. And that often takes being divorced from the things that are in your face and harming you because you don't have the strength of mind to practice at that time. So yeah, this is all a process. Yeah. So good. Any other comments? We're about 5 after the hour, so I don't want to go too late, but if you do have additional questions, again, feel free to write to me or to put them down and put them in the chat box for next time or whatever the case might be. We have one more class next Monday for concluding this. And again, I'm feeling that we're perfectly fine. We got made up through 118, which is about what I aimed for tonight. And we will go through 134. And if there is any time by any chance to review anything, I'll do that. But I don't know that we'll have time for that. And then we begin chapter 7 at the tail end of September. And there will be additional materials coming out on that before too long. I'll get those to Sheila and to Maria, and we'll make sure that, or actually to Jennifer. Jennifer can post them out on Shantideva's website, but we'll make sure people know that those are out there and how you gain access to those when you register for the course on chapter 7. That will go for 5 sessions only. It's a shorter chapter, and I'm confident I'll make it through in those 5 sessions. So let's go to the prayers and do just the concluding prayers that we generally do for these classes. Beginning with this verse where we dedicate all the merit to our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings, keeping in mind, again, that we need all those beings, even the difficult people, in order to accumulate all these qualities and become a Buddha. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then recalling bodhicitta and how important it is that we grow and develop that in our own hearts, and wishing for that to develop in the hearts of all beings, especially the leaders of the world at this time. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then on to the prayers for our precious teachers. Again, they are part of the Buddha jewel for us, the three jewels. They are the way that the Buddhas are helping us on our path. So we need to also create merit in relation to them. We need to have them in our lives. We need to continue to receive wisdom from them. So let's recite with good intentions for these two teachers, as well as all those spiritual guides in the world, to have good health and long lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Then finally, dedicating for all those that you're holding in your heart right now, beings who are experiencing obstacles or who are ill at this time or who have died recently or who might even be dying at this time. Extend this merit out to all of these beings so it becomes the cause to remove their suffering completely and to give them all the causes and conditions for them to be able to develop themselves completely. And may all beings find true peace and happiness through what we've done here tonight. Wonderful. Didn't go too far over. Anyway, I appreciate everyone's patience and hanging in there for a few extra minutes. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday for the final class. And again, the same handouts and all that will be posted hopefully by later tomorrow. I should have time to get to those in the morning. And the recording will probably also be up on the website by then. So anyway, have a good week and I will see you next Monday. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank
Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you. Good night.